and welcome to another episode of Some Random Thoughts. I am your host, Ryan Mulkowsky. On this episode, I have with me my special guest, Erin Green. Erin is the new Campus and Alumni Organizer for REAP. They are an affirming biblical scholar and LGBTQ plus activist. Erin has a Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Studies from Azusa Pacific University and an M.Div from San Francisco Theological Seminary. Their specialties are in the entire Christian biblical corpus, with an emphasis on the Hebrew Bible, the ancient Near East, exegesis, and how to employ various hermeneutical methods. Erin's passion is helping those excluded by the church to heal from spiritual abuse and trauma by navigating the biblical text in restorative ways. Erin is best known for their work in supporting LGBTQ plus students on conservative Christian university campuses and in religious spaces. Together, we discussed queer identity and Christianity and Erin's journey into affirming their fullest self and finding meaning and purpose in the Christian tradition, along with the work they do to advocate for LGBTQ plus rights in the church and on college campuses, especially faith-based campuses with a history of LGBTQ plus discrimination. Thank you for listening and enjoy. Erin, welcome to Some Random Thoughts.
Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you for having me.
I am very excited to have you on. Erin Green is here with me on the program, and many of you probably know Erin. You can find Erin on Twitter. Where else are you? I follow you mostly on Twitter. You're on Instagram too.
I'm on Instagram. I rarely make it on Facebook. So
yeah, me too.
Probably don't even try. But Instagram and Twitter for sure. I'm very active on both those platforms.
Great. And so we'll have all of her details in the notes in the podcast. So please look up Erin. Erin does fantastic work, a lot of advocacy work, some scholarship and all of that. And we're going to jump right into that today. So today's topic is, I've titled it kind of loosely like queerness and Christianity. And the reason why I want to talk about this is, even though I'm an atheist, I find it very fascinating to find forms of spirituality that are very inclusive, very open, very affirming, very welcoming of all people for who they are intrinsically as a human. And I want to uplift more of those voices, because we have too many voices still that are just very exclusionary and very condemnatory and just very and we still have a lot of problems societally, not just in religion, but societally as a whole, on increased discrimination and even violence, especially towards trans people, queer people, non-binary people. And so it's important that we talk about these things. And so Erin, I'm just glad that Erin's here, because Erin's going to share a lot about her story and her background and her education and the work that she does, and really provide a lot of good resources, hopefully for all of us to learn more, especially for those of us who are ignorant, and we need to learn more about how we can maybe reconcile queer identity with the Christian faith. Because as someone who born, raised, and continues to live in the South, we still have a lot of discrimination. We still have a lot of problems, especially with progressive churches in the South, who are really trying to have open and affirming and welcoming spaces, and a lot of hate that comes from conservative evangelicalism or fundamentalist factions of Christianity. So that's just to give you the overview. I'm going to let Erin talk most of the time, so I'll shut up. But Erin, first of all, tell the audience more about yourself, and specifically, how did you become a Christian? Why are you a Christian? And how your identity as a queer person, but then also as a Christian, has led you to do all of the advocacy work that you're doing today.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. That's a really great question. It's a lot to unpack, I think, but
it is. Yeah, I'm sorry to throw it all at you at once, but
good.
I feel like you can handle it. So
I feel like I can. I mean, I've definitely had to answer this before. So I grew up in an evangelical, non-denominational tradition, and
Okay.
pretty strictly conservative Christian.
Mm.
When I was forced to go to church, I did
Mm.
not want to go. I remember just dreading it. I didn't want to go at all. But
Yeah.
I think I was reading a Bible that was geared toward young folks. I think I was around 11 or 12, and it was just the New Testament, but
Mm.
it had a sort of a guide kind of for topics surrounding folks my age, like
Okay.
dating and sex, and it even addressed homosexuality and life in the church as a young adult and all these things. And then when you finish that portion, it asks you to ask Jesus into your heart. and, and I did that. And I was just like, yes, I'm doing this, balls to the wall, like full force.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think that's when I fully embraced whatever I knew or understood to be God or the Christian tradition, Jesus, whatever. And obviously, I would find out growing up that I was very different from my peers. I was not straight. And I would struggle deeply with my sexuality and my faith, because my faith
Right.
was the largest obstacle in the way of me embracing who I was as a queer person. And it was just torment and turmoil. It was awful. And I never, though the strange thing is, I never doubted God. I just doubted what the text said. I was like, this doesn't sound right. There's something wrong with the way that we're approaching queer folks or LGBTQIA folks, and the way that we're loving them or talking to them about this topic, whatever. And I always thought something was off when I was, in high school and in my early 20s. So for me, I could not find that point of reconciliation for a very long time with my sexuality and my faith. And what I decided to do, or what the route I took, was I went hardcore into the gay scene in Los Angeles. I jettisoned anything faith related. And I just embraced being queer. And I was closeted doing this. I didn't tell anybody about it in my immediate family or my other, my straight friend circles. I just literally showed up at a gay bar one time and was like, here I am, and met people and, kept doing that. Like I would go several times during the week. Well, it turns out I developed a very unhealthy relationship with alcohol, and was using alcohol as a way to numb the pain, the spiritual trauma that I had been going through. And so I would do alcohol and drugs, and I just tried to drown out any kind of feelings of pain or turmoil or conflict or challenge about who I was. And I thought, I must do this because I can't be who I am, and I don't know what to do about that. Well, that solution didn't work for very long. Some people don't come out of those situations alive. I'm lucky I did, to tell you the truth. That's a whole other story. But I came out of it alive, and I came out of the drinking part and the drug part alive. And so there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something else here that's happening. So what I did was I resigned from my career. I went back to school. I had to start from scratch. I was in my 30s. I came out when I was 32. And I went back into academia, like straight up, like psychology 101 classes, poli-sci, like all the classes you take in the beginning, because I didn't go to school when I graduated high school. So I started from scratch and kismet and like fate happened. Like at this community college I was going to, there was a New Testament studies professor and doctor or PhD in New Testament studies teaching philosophy of Old and New Testament at this community college. It was so random and weird.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got to take those classes because I was obsessed with the Bible in the sense that I'm a puzzle kind of person, and I want to know things and I want to figure them out. And even if I can't have all the like tangible answers, I want to know how the puzzle kind of works. I want to know how someone really can approach the text. Am I allowed to do that as a queer person? And how can I do that? And whatever, that was something that was so interesting to me. And there was a part of me that wanted to latch onto my faith still. So this professor quickly became my academic mentor, and I came out to him, and he was like, oh, well, you must do this. This is your vocation. Like you are so talented and gifted in exegesis and hermeneutics and all these things. Like this must be your vacation, or not vacation. It was not a vacation.
Vocation. Your vocation. Yeah.
The vocation.
Wait, you didn't think that like rigorous academic study was like, blissful or just fun or anything like that? Okay.
I did it first. I thought it was great. And then I got into grad school and I was like, oh boy, this is killing me.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he was the first clergy person that I was able to come out to who affirmed me as queer and affirmed me as like a queer person having legitimized authority over the text. And that was shocking to me. So because the evangelical Christian church teaches women, especially queer people, do not have authority over the text.
Right.
That belongs to discursive authority over the text, belongs to straight white men.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And those are the folks that we have looked, or that I have previously looked to legitimize in some way Christianity, faith, or the text. So this was the first time I'd ever heard like, oh, I can do this. I can actually go down this journey of learning and deconstructing and analyzing the text, because that was what I was interested in. I was never interested in being a pastor. I was never interested in any of the clerical pieces. I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to take I wanted to deconstruct things and build them back up again, or just move the parts around. And
you want to be a true academic, like
I wanted to
research and break things down. Really quick, so I just want to make sure I got this clear. So when you were going back to college, you said there was a period of time out, that, you left kind of conservative evangelical faith, and then you just weren't involved in any kind of faith context. Was there ever a moment in your life around that time when you first entered LA and then later went back to college where you were not a Christian? Or would you say that you were always there was always some belief in a faith or a spirituality in a God or an afterlife or just something? Or did you have moments of like agnosticism or atheism where you were like, no, I just don't believe this anymore? I'm just interested to kind of hear that whole transition, because that's a huge transition to move from conservative evangelical environment, but then you have, your feelings, these, sexual and identity, gender identity feelings that aren't lining up with your perceived beliefs in Christianity, which obviously is going to cause, like you said, lots of spiritual trauma, lots of pain, suffering, things like that. And then you're moving outside of that, but then you're still trying to find your way. So I'm just curious kind of where you were in that, just to make sure I have it clear.
So I think I did believe. I think I believed in something. I believe that there was something bigger. I believe in God. I just didn't believe. I was finding it difficult to believe that this God would treat or disavow my identity as a queer
The
person.
conservative evangelical Christian God you no
Yes.
longer believed in, and we're like, I'm totally done with that God. But there still is a God. I might not be able to define it at this moment, but there's still something there, and I want to know.
I think that time in my life was when I started to pull myself away from the conservative evangelical God.
Okay.
That's when I started to turn my back, even if I did it in an unhealthy way. Because, we do it, or I'll only speak for myself, like we do it kind of under duress, because you feel, you are beholden to this almighty, omnipotent, omniscient, powerful, punitive damages God, that's going to sin manage your life and like whatever. I think that's when I really started to tear at the fabrics of like that belief. And thinking, this is bullshit. Sorry if I can't.
No, you're totally fine.
Okay.
Totally fine.
But that was the first time I started to really question and doubt that was okay or true or whatever, because I took a risk. I was basically saying to God, even whether or not I was drinking or abusing alcohol, I said to God, I'm not doing this. I'm going to hang out with my people. And I'm going to see what that is like. I'm going to turn my back on you. And I did. I turned my back on that God. And so I came out with some bruises and like whatever in a lot of senses, because of my evangelical Christian upbringing, I didn't have the tools and the resources to be a healthy queer person. With a faith, I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to date people, or women. I didn't know how to be in a relationship with a woman, or I didn't know any of those things. I was just experimenting. I was just trying to see what that was like, So anyway, yes, I went back to school, got my bachelor's degree in biblical studies, and then an M.Div from San Francisco Theological Seminary. But that is when I started to, like, when I went back to school, I was like, this must be different for queer folk. For queer folk who want to explore the journey of what faith looks like in God and in Christianity, or in with this topic of like the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, those texts, so that's what I did. And then I, when I was in college, got immediately involved in activism for LGBTQ students who were attending private religious colleges and who are discriminated against on a daily basis at those schools. It's just awful. It's basically like the conservative evangelical church, but they just so happen to be accredited academic bodies.
Okay.
For whatever reason. But they are. So that's how I got involved in activism. And that's what I've been doing for the last 6-7 years. And then also navigating the topics of spirituality, of the text, specifically exegesis, hermeneutics, and how to basically be able to approach the text in a way, whether or not you believe in it. I'm the kind of person that's, the point isn't necessarily to believe in anything. That's kind of how I approach the text. And I wish I was taught that from the very beginning. But
what is the point? If it's not belief, what is the point of the text, would you say?
I think it's to find meaning and value. Okay. I think that there is, just as, and there's awful things in the biblical text, of course, but as a piece of literature, as a way of, finding meaning, finding what it even meant to the early communities and civilizations involved in the text, meaning the Israelites, and early Christians and things like that. But sort of being able to pull apart, who are these people? What did they do? Why did they do what they do? or why did they do what they did? Are they making mistakes? These are the things I'm looking for. Are they making mistakes? Are they, who are they? What are they doing? How are they talking to God? How do they approach God? How do they approach the question of spirituality? All these things I'm looking for. And I realized, oh my God, we have been giving people no credit whatsoever for just the value of being a human being.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we have taken that ability. Evangelical Christianity has taken away the ability for someone to just be human.
Yes, absolutely. 100% would agree. Yeah.
And that in and of itself is so damaging to someone's personhood, whether or not you're queer or straight or whatever. This affects us all, and that's kind of what I started to realize in school. And I think that's why I still love the Bible so much, or I love the text so much. And I do identify as Christian because I think it allows us to do more than we were taught. I think it gives us more freedom than we were taught. And I think God gives us more freedom than we were taught. So even though I consider myself to be in extremely low church, I don't go to church anymore. I don't want to. Right now in this season of my life, I am choosing not to go to church. And I think we're allowed the freedom to do those kinds of things, to take a break. There are other Christians who would vehemently disagree with me. But I consider myself to be very low on the tradition bar and very high on the freedom bar, very high and as far as exploring, taking breaks, the human aspect of who we are just by nature and what our needs are, and in community. So that's sort of where I'm at right now. Kind of weird, but here we are.
No, I wouldn't say it's weird. It's interesting for sure. Where do you see yourself in your belief specifically with Christianity in and of itself? Would you say that, okay, how can I phrase this? Would you say that Christianity is like the only practice that a Christian should have, or do you believe in like the blending of various faiths or spiritual practices together? Like, where do you see yourself? Because I think that's the one thing that still, I think, confuses me about progressive Christianity or any form of Christianity that is more open and affirming and inclusive of LGBTQ people and other marginalized and oppressed communities. Is there's still, to me, this like exclusionary, insular kind of identity that gets formed in a community, especially like in the church community, which kind of turned me off because I saw a lot of the, even in like progressive Christian communities, I was still seeing a lot of the mechanisms of like evangelicalism in the communities, but we allow like LGBTQ people. And like there were like subtle, like not even subtle differences, like major significant differences. Like, okay, yeah, we're not going to condemn LGBTQ people, which is great. Like totally for completely affirming and being and welcoming, people because of their gender and sexual identity. At the same time, it was like, if you had doubts or you had questions or you wanted to explore your spirituality outside of the confines of like the text, you would still get like railroaded for that, right? In some progressive Christian communities. And that was the problem with me even exploring progressive Christianity throughout my deconstruction, which was like getting out of conservative evangelicalism was like basically for my mental health. Like I was not well in that space. So progressive Christianity did a positive thing I will say about it is it gave me a landing space. It gave me like a spot where I could like feel like I could still be a part of this thing, this community or this tradition or this movement, but without so much of the toxicity. And yet I think I still wrestled with, okay, my beliefs are still evolving and changing, and I just can't hold on to this thing anymore. And as beautiful as a community can be, and as important as community is, because we are, as humans, social animals and social creatures that are wired to be with other people, for, innate mechanisms like survival, and more self-actualized mechanisms like being able to seek employment and have family and find fulfillment and meaning in those various things. So for you specifically, how would you address, first of all, let me ask you, Erin, what are your specific beliefs, your personal beliefs about exclusivity versus inclusivity when it comes to the Christian tradition? And then I'll ask you something else later. I don't want to put too much on you. So how would you feel about, what are your particular beliefs about that?
I don't believe in exclusivity at all.
Okay.
So one of the most important moments I think I had, like in one of my classes with that professor I was telling you about earlier.
Yes.
He brought a Jewish rabbi into our class, and it was philosophy of the Hebrew Bible.
Mm.
And this rabbi, this teacher and incredible scholar said, don't ever tell a Jew what the Hebrew Bible says.
Oh, love it. Oh man, that's so good.
That's when I knew, I'm like, I better keep my mouth shut, and I better start listening to Jewish folk, and I better start like I learned about, in school as I would go along, learning about midrash, learning about ancient Jewish thought, and even and to expand on that, it was like not just Jewish thought, Black women's thoughts, Black men's thoughts on the Hebrew Bible, Muslim thought on the Hebrew Bible, all those things. I am not an exclusionary person. I think that that's a dangerous thing to do. I think we need to invite folks in community, in communion with one another, and listen to one another. And I'm not saying that'll solve all the problems. I think humans will always have conflict and challenges and things like that. But I don't think that Christianity is exclusive to Christians.
Okay.
At all. And I don't think you have to have a specific set of beliefs or values in Christianity, whatever XYZ theological statement may be, in order to be labeled a Christian or in order to be acceptable before God.
Okay. No, that's really good to know and to hear, because I feel like, so what is your perception then of like faith community spaces or church spaces then? Like where is, and then we'll focus on progressive Christianity, because obviously it would be hours of like, we could talk about all the nonsense of like conservative or fundamentalist evangelical faith. Like, let's just not go into that. It's just, that'd be a whole different conversation of all the problems with that. But let's focus on the progressive Christian space. First of all, how do you feel about the term progressive Christian? First of all, I never asked you, like, how does that resonate with you? Is it problematic? Is it accurate? How do you feel about it personally?
I think words matter. It's very problematic.
Okay.
And it's vague. I mean, it doesn't, like, just because a church says they're LGBTQ affirming, and they could have a Black Lives Matter flag and a rainbow flag or trans flag or whatever on hanging from their church rafters. Right. I don't know. That doesn't tell me anything, honestly, about the heart of those people who are actually going there, and like what kinds of discussions they're having, what kinds of organizations they're working with, or people they're talking to. So progressive to me just means like you want to not be conservative anymore, because conservatism or conservative Christianity has somehow been damaging. You recognize that it's damaging. It's not okay. Yeah. That's fine. I get it. But I mean, I personally don't, like I said earlier, I don't go to church right now in this season, because I think I recognize that there's a chasm
Yeah.
between like the actions of what progressive churches do and what they say they're going to do. Because human history repeats itself. We build the same prisons, I think, that we're in sometimes in the evangelical church. You know,
Right.
sometimes we do that to ourselves. And instead of it becoming about, you know, like you might be more inclusive or whatever, you might be more gung-ho about civil rights or whatever it may be, but you're still exclusive in the sense that like you're closing yourself off, I think, to well, I think they care. I think there's this particular care over how they look as a person. Like and I feel like for me anyway, as a like growing up in evangelicalism, that was
Right.
so important to be right all the time.
Right.
Because apologetics was key. It was everything. It was everything.
Yeah. Right.
Not loving people, you know, it was like, I gotta be right. And I think that some of those things trickle over into progressive Christianity that
Yeah.
need to be right about the topic, about the
Mm-hmm.
passion, about Black Lives Matter, about queer rights and things like that,
Yeah.
rather than taking the right actions for those communities. And, you know, I'm just not, I took a polity class, I had to, I'm a member of the PCUSA. But I was just like, this is the most boring, worst thing ever. I was just like, get me out of here. So, but I have amazing friends who are so good at, and wonderful, you know, at things like that. I just never was interested in it. And I don't know, I kind of feel like I've always been a black sheep in some sense, always going against the grain. I don't know what that's all about, but I feel the same way about church, and I feel that way to this day. And maybe someday I'll want to return. I don't know. But right now I just don't feel like going. And
Gotcha.
that's my
Yeah.
word on it, you know?
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I wanted to ask you about this one criticism that I'm seeing, especially in the atheist community, specifically the queer atheist community. Some queer atheists have accused progressive Christians or queer Christians specifically with aligning with fundamentalist or conservative evangelical Christians, in the sense that some queer atheists feel like their voices are excluded because they don't believe. That it seems like the focus has still been so much more important on, you know, I'm a part of this camp, I'm a part of this camp, and because we're a part of this camp and you're not a part of this camp, we're gonna, you know, exclude you. I've seen some queer Christians talk about a lot of the pain of just feeling excluded or not feeling welcome or not feeling like they could be at the part of the table when they talk about, you know, LGBTQ rights and progressing LGBTQ agendas forward, because queer Christians, you know, are more focused on, you know, pushing the Christian tradition and narratives and the teachings and those explanations more than pushing the agenda forward. What is your response to that? I don't know if you've seen it on Twitter. I mean, I've seen it on Twitter. I'm not even a queer person, but I don't know if you've seen criticisms from queer atheists about how queer Christians operate in society and when it comes to LGBTQ rights. What would your response be to that as a queer Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really seen so much queer atheists, you know, talking about those specific things, but if they are, I don't blame them. If they are, I understand why, and I, because I've seen it happen to among queer believers in general, queer Christians in general, that there will be different camps of like side B Christians, side B queer
Right.
Christians, side A, side
Right.
X, you know, and then now there's some organizations, Christian organizations that do take a much more traditional stance when it comes to something like marriage, you know, or sexual ethics. And then they'll pit, you know, more progressive queer Christians or more, I guess, you know, poly queer Christians, because they're out there,
Yes, right.
They will say, they will disavow their sexual ethic and say, well, here in the Bible, you're supposed to be in a marriage with one person. So there's all kinds of problematic things happening among queer Christians themselves. And I think it's
that's a good
problematic in general to exclude any atheists from any conversation or any dialogue, whether they're queer or straight. I think that we should be in constant conversation with atheists and agnostics about things, and about specific issues as it relates to civil rights and movement forward in, advancement for BIPOC communities and queer communities, just in general, in healthcare and things like that. There's all kinds of things. But yeah, to exclude atheists in general from any conversation, I think is very problematic. And it always points to, for me, that you are not interested in having that conversation with someone. And I always wonder why. Like, why not? Why do we have to exclude queer atheists from the conversation or the dialogue? They have a lot to say. They've been hurt. There's a lot of trauma, and we need everybody's opinions when it comes to the advancement of queer civil rights in this, especially in the United States, and so many other places in the world. But
in the world, everywhere. And I don't want to just make it like Christians and atheists are the only people that exist. I mean, there's queers that queer people and in all religions and no religions and in all backgrounds. And like you said, there are queer communities all over the world. And we know that there's, especially LGBTQ people in certain countries are just, you could still, literally die, like lose your life just for having that identity. So we understand that there have been advancements, and Erin and I are speaking from an American context where we're both live in the United States, and so anyone that's listening outside of that, that's the perspective we're talking from. But at the same time, there's still so much progression that needs to happen, and so much more inclusion that needs to happen in all facets of our society. I want to talk to you as we close about your work. I really appreciate you taking the time to really unpack a lot of those nuances with me about Christianity and queer identity. And you've done such a beautiful job with that. But tell me more about REAP, the Religious Exemption Accountability Project that you are a part of. What is REAP, and why does REAP exist?
REAP, oh my gosh. Okay, so REAP stands for the Religious Exemption Accountability Project. Basically, what REAP does is empower queer, trans, and non-binary students at more than 200 taxpayer-funded religious schools who are actively discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, of course. REAP does that through civil rights litigation, documentary film, oral history, research and public policy. And we basically work toward making sure that all queer and trans people are treated with respect and dignity and have a safe learning environment at whatever academic institution they choose. And it just so happens that the fight right now is largely on private religious institutional campuses for queer folk. And that's what I do. I'm a community organizer and campus organizer, and I help these students navigate the world of the private Christian institution, which is a really hard place for LGBTQIA folks.
Can imagine.
There's microaggressions, overt aggressions. It's just terrible for a lot of these folks. And I do a lot of public education around why LGBTQ students are even at these schools, because most people have that question of like, why on earth are they in that space in the first place? So I do a lot of education and surrounding that specific topic and answering that question of why, why do we end up here? Why did we go here? And then I help these students basically, do whatever they need to do to protect their rights, whether that's filing Title IX complaints, accreditation complaints, creating petitions or direct action organization, anything like that. REAP is the only organization doing what it does right now. So it's really important work.
Well, I appreciate you and the work that you and others at REAP do. Really quickly, what has historically protected private Christian institutions specifically from not, you know, not having any kind of negative consequences levied against them for their discrimination against queer, non-binary, trans individuals?
Coming up under the banner of religious freedom. They
Okay.
want to protect their religious freedoms. And they basically petition the government for protections of that alleged freedom to discriminate. So basically, it's the Department of Education and the Office of Civil Rights that are the ones who are responsible for handing out Title IX. There's Title IX protections for these students, and there's other various things that protect them. But Title IX is one of the largest statutes, and
Okay.
it's been around since the 70s. It used to be protect solely on the basis of sex, but now it includes gender identity and sexual orientation, which is very important.
Yes.
But what these schools are able to do under the banner, under the argument of religious freedom, is claim an exemption from the government to being able to follow Title IX anti-discrimination policies.
Wait, so let me get this straight. So they don't have to have Title IX at their school? They're exempt from it?
They do have to have the clause up there.
Oh, you have to? Okay.
But what they do, so let's say, XYZ student is going to Biola University. Okay. And they were this LGBTQ person was discriminated against at Biola.
Okay.
Well, this person at Biola can file a Title IX complaint, but what they probably don't know, and a lot of schools don't publicize, is that Biola already has a Title IX exemption given to them by the government, by the Department of Education. So that student is no longer protected under Title IX.
So it's they have Title IX, but there's the exemption. They have the exemption that basically removes all responsibility of enforcing Title IX. And so therefore they can discriminate against these people without retribution from the federal government. Especially queer folk. Because normally a Title IX complaint, like if it were a straight person, would probably be like, yes, we're going to take this seriously. For a queer person, it's a threat to the university. So, it's pretty wild stuff. And these schools get they're taxpayer funded. They get federal government. Yep. Yes. And they're tax exempt. Okay. Yeah. Which is, obviously one of my major issues with, I think, Christianity in general, especially a lot of churches is because churches, are tax exempt and, they contribute nothing to, the tax, to taxes federally, state, and local, and yet they're still allowed to receive. So like one of the biggest issues are private Christian universities that are maybe fully accredited by various accrediting bodies. And if you're accredited by accrediting body, you qualify to receive federal funds, like for financial aid and stuff like that. So it's like they reap the benefits without having to do any of the responsibility to ensure the protection of all of their students, or they can on purpose, it sounds like purposefully, continue to discriminate against certain students because of their religious beliefs, and yet still not pay any taxes like other like public or private non-religious universities do, and they still get federal aid, or financial aid through the federal government. So it's just like, it sounds like it's just this batshit mind fuck of, we get all the benefits, but we can still perpetuate all the harm and have no accountability to anybody really. And that the federal government won't do anything about it, even though they're supposed to do something about it because of Title IX. So it's like, it blows my mind. And this is one of the reasons I really wanted you to come on to this podcast, is to talk about this, because it's just like, it makes no sense to me how the federal government is allowing this to happen in the first place.
They are not only allowing it, they are the ones perpetuating it in some sense, because they're the ones handing out the religious exemptions to these schools.
Okay.
So they're in some way like they're responsible, for
they're culpable,
allowing it to happen. But you made just a great case for me as to why people should be concerned about this in general. Your taxpayer dollars go to schools like Biola. They go to school like or go to schools like Liberty University in Virginia.
Right.
They go towards discriminating against LGBTQ students every single day. So,
it's horrible.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Tell me about how, but tell me about, you made a good point earlier when we first started talking about REAP. How do people that identify as queer, non-binary, trans, gay, lesbian, bisexual, how do they end up finding themselves at these institutions?
Yeah,
most likely, like for example, how would somebody find themselves at a Biola or at a Liberty or at a Wheaton or one of these other schools that will deliberately discriminate against them, deny them their existence as a gender and sexuality wise? It's like, how do they find themselves there? Why would they stay there, knowing that it's probably a really toxic environment for them, and it's just not a safe environment, to be honest? Tell me a little bit more about that. What are the stories that you've heard or you see?
So there's basically three main answers to that.
Okay.
The biggest one, I think, is that most queer and trans students don't even discover or realize that they're queer or trans until they're in college, until they're in that space. And what has happened is that sometimes that's the only college their parents will pay for. Sometimes that's the only space the parents will fund. And they'll say, you're going to this school, because I'm paying for it. I'm paying your housing, I'm paying your meals, I'm paying your whatever, and you're going to go here. A lot of these students have grown up in the Christian tradition. And so like, if you're between the ages of 17 and 24, you don't have a lot of financial independence to be able to say, oh yeah, I'm going to go here instead of here, especially if your parents are flipping the bill. But once they discover that they're queer or trans, and then they realize everyone around them, including their school, is non-affirming, then they're kind of stuck, like they have no safe spaces or no safe community to go to. And so the third thing would be, well, why don't they just transfer? And that kind of ties into like the age range again. Like that's a huge thing to ask of someone. That's a huge financial and logistical uprooting that someone would have to do. Transferring is really hard, and sometimes other schools won't take like your full amount of credits, so that'll expand your graduation time, things like that. So it's not that we want to keep people in these situations at all. What we want to do is dismantle the system itself, and believe that all students should be treated equally, have safe learning environments everywhere. But yes, I mean, in some situations it's like desperate and you should, if you can, get out. But that's just not always feasible, especially.
Well, thank you for explaining that. Yeah. No, thank you for explaining that. I think you would hear a lot of pushback of like, oh, why would they be there? Why can't they just leave? And you've given a lot of really good reasons. Is like, we forget, like, college students are still really young. And like you said, they are just beginning to have independence, and they don't really have that. And they don't really have like that true independence. There's still there's a shift from dependence to independence in those years. And so you've made a lot of great points there. One other thing is, what is the goal then? Like, if you had a magic wand and you could just, what would REAP do if it just had all the power, all the control, and could make things happen? Like, what is the goal? Like, what would you like to see happen? Like a complete removal of the religious exemption? What's the end goal?
That would be a huge step, the religious exemption piece. But I think just we want, the fact of the matter is there are students who are Christian and queer. And if they want to get a certain degree or even or whatever, they should be able to go to whatever school they want to, learn in safety, be treated with dignity, respect, and love, no matter where they're at, and have the same access to education as everyone else. So, but we know that that's not going to happen in a lot of these spaces that exist. So, I mean, I can't really speak for REAP in terms of like, what its ultimate end goal would be, other than to keep these students safe and protected at all costs. I know that that's our goal. and we're working and fighting against the systems that that impede upon that reality for these students. So whatever that looks like, that's what we do.
That's absolutely wonderful. I wish you and everybody at REAP nothing but the best in continuing to advocate and push this forward, because there's absolutely no excuse in this day and age for anybody to feel unsafe or unwelcomed, and potentially harmed because of the learning environment that they're in. And so I really appreciate all the work that you and the others at REAP do. We're going to have to end our time, unfortunately. I would love to talk to you again sometime, Erin, to
Sure.
unpack more of these things. But Erin Green has been on Some Random Thoughts with me. And Erin, thank you so much for being here, and I wish you well.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much. You all take care. Thank you so much for listening to Some Random Thoughts. You can find the podcast in audio form wherever you get your podcast, and at anchor.fm/somerandomthoughts. You can find the podcast in video form on my YouTube at youtube.com/Ryan Mulkowsky. Connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Ryan Mulkowsky, and on my website at www.ryanmulkowsky.com. That's RyanMulkowsky. Programming note: this is a completely self-produced project, and the guests on this program have volunteered their time. So until next time, you have one life. Make the most of it.